Economic Facts and Fallacies, quote, "Some things are believed because they are demonstrably true, but many other things are believed simply because they have been asserted repeatedly," close quote. You wish to let that gloomy observation on human nature stand?
Yes.
Race wasn't the basis of slavery?
Oh, it's a simple historical matter. Slavery existed for thousands of years, as far back as there are any records of human beings. Archaeological finds suggest that slavery existed before human beings could read and write. So, a racial difference between the slaves and the enslavers, that is a relatively new phenomenon. You didn't have in ancient times the ability to go to another continent and move millions of people of a different race across the ocean. So you enslaved the people who were nearby. The Europeans enslaved Slavs for centuries before they brought the first black African to the Western Hemisphere.
Okay, but so you're not suggesting, you do not wish to say anything other than that slavery as practiced in the United States it may have been recent, but you'd be willing to grant that it was particularly perverse and destructive,
no,
because race got mixed into it at that point, right?
Race got mixed into it in the United States more than anywhere else for a very simple reason. The United States was founded, as the Declaration said, of independence, said all men are created equal.
Right.
If that's true, then the only way you can justify slavery is to say that some men are less than men.
I see. So the racial
but in Brazil, where Brazil imported more slaves than the United States, there was no such ideology. Brazil was not a democratic country. The whole issue never arose.
I see. I see. All right. Race doesn't account for differences in black-white income?
No, the differences between income between Western Europeans and Eastern Europeans is greater than the difference between blacks and whites in the United States. Differences in income are the rule, they are not the exception.
So, looking at all these sociological studies that show a persistent gap between African Americans in income and every other form of American in income is what? Useless? It tells us things that we don't need to know? It misleads us? How would you describe that?
Wrong, I think, sums it up. It is not true. Hispanics have a lower per capita income than blacks. Hispanic households and families have a higher income than black households and families, simply because the Hispanic families are larger.
Economic Facts and Fallacies. A fallacy is that the current fatherless families so prevalent among contemporary blacks are a legacy of slavery, where families were not recognized under slavery. This ignores the fact that the problem has become much worse among generations of blacks far removed from slavery than among generations closer to the era of slavery. Yes. Close quote. Explain that.
You mean explain why it is so, or
yes? Yeah, why is that? Why? What on earth is going on there? That is so counter to what we assume.
Well, first of all, most people have not recognized the fact that if you go back into the 20s, you find that married couple families were much more prevalent among blacks then than today. You find also, incidentally, that the blacks had, as late as 1930, blacks had lower unemployment rates than whites. So all these things that we complain about and attribute to the era of slavery, those things should have been worse in the past than in the present.
Right.
But in fact, they're worse in the present than in the past. And I think if you want to look for a turning point, it would be since the 1960s.
And what happened in the 1960s?
Oh, you began to have not only the welfare state, you began to have the mindset that goes with the welfare state, so that there was no stigma any longer attached, for example, to being on relief or welfare.
And so, but why? Well, illegitimacy is exploding now among, it's high among Hispanics,
yes.
and it's exploding among whites. But the Moynihan report, when was that, Tom?
Or in the 60s, 64, 65.
When Moynihan talked about the illegitimacy rate among blacks, which was exploding then. So what if the welfare state changes the way Americans think? Why did black Americans prove susceptible to that change first?
Because they were poor. I don't think that many Asian American girls who are preparing to go off to Stanford or Harvard are going to say, hey, I can live on welfare, why should I abstain?
Distinguish the two, race and discrimination.
Well, racism is an attitude inside people's heads.
Right.
Discrimination is an overt act taking place outside in the real world.
Okay.
So not only with blacks, but you find the same thing with Jews in previous centuries, that part of the United States where there was the most racism against blacks, namely the South,
right,
is where black construction workers were much more common than they were in the North, right on into the 20th century. And most people are unaware that in the South, blacks were the construction workers. I remember a professor at Howard University saying that when he was a boy in the South, his father pointed to some man on the street and said, he was the first first white construction worker in this town.
And so what was going on there? The racism did not, so whites could think of blacks as somehow or other separate, but they'd still employ them because the market made it profitable to do so.
Yeah, in fact, yes. In fact, a law had to be passed to stop this because in the 20s, and particularly as the Depression got underway, black construction companies in the South using black non-union labor would come up to the North and underbid on government contracts, taking them away. And so this was very common, to the point where they passed the Davis-Bacon Act, which said that on government contracts you must pay the prevailing wage, which translated almost invariably into the union wage.
Right. So your point on the distinction between racism and discrimination is, don't worry about racism. It's inside people's heads. You can't measure it. There's a strongly subjective, just forget about it, concentrate only on discrimination, and the best answer to discrimination is to let markets operate, because then people will discover, it will tend to militate against discrimination. When people have skills to offer, they'll be employed. Whatever this notion of racism in people's heads is, don't worry about that. Is that right?
Yeah, what I'm saying essentially is that racists may prefer one race to another, but they prefer themselves to everybody else.
So they'll do what's profitable.
That's right. That's right.
Got it.
And
okay.
that was even true in South Africa under apartheid. That there were hundreds of construction companies in South Africa that were fined in a government crackdown because they were hiring more blacks and in higher positions than they were allowed to under the apartheid law, because that was where the money was.
Once again, race and culture, economic facts and fallacies. Race is used as a sorting device for decision-making, even by people who are not racists. Thus, employers may be reluctant to hire young black males because these employers are aware of what a high proportion of them have been arrested or imprisoned, even if the employers have no antipathy to black people as such and readily hire older blacks or black females, close quote. Are you saying that discrimination, even on the basis of race, you're saying it can be rational, do you want to suggest that it can be acceptable?
Well, that's a different question.
Yes,
but I do notice that among a group of employers who routinely check everyone for prison records, the hiring of young black males is greater than in the employers in general. Whereas once they realize,
if they find somebody whose record is clean, they'll take him.
Yes.